While we're, yes, that's me pressing record. Okay. So hello to everyone and welcome. As I said, we are going to reopen the room and we are going to be starting shortly. Out of respect for your time, I'm sure there'll be others joining us. As you know, this is a Georgetown Village CCC program, which now stands for Cocktails, Conversation, and Community. We're happy to welcome members of the community to join us for these talks. And we always have an interesting speaker and lots for people to learn about. Today, our speaker is Tommy Wells. He is the director of the Department of Energy and Environment. He was appointed to that position in January 2015, and he's chiefly responsible for protecting the environment and conserving natural resources in the District of Columbia. So he's definitely taking care of us on the local level. Tommy's team is comprised of approximately 300 environmental professionals, and they work to improve the quality of life for residents. Tommy was one of the chief people responsible for the law on the plastic bags. The reason that there's a 5-cent surcharge and we all use our recycling bags is thanks to Tommy Wells. It's made a real difference in the amount of people that use plastic bags. I think one study I read said that it increased 75% in terms of people bringing their own bags. So that's a huge improvement. That was part of the 2009 Anacostia River Cleanup and Protection Act. Tommy has a career in public service that spans 32 years. And as he shared with us prior to my opening the room, Tommy is an MSW with a law degree. So I'm kind of excited about that. And certainly it does speak to my heart. And we are very excited to have Tommy with us today. Tommy, I welcome you to the Georgetown Village CCC program. And we're happy that you're here today.
Thank you, Lynn. I was excited when Mary Lopato invited me because I remember when we first started the first village on Capitol Hill when I was the city councilman, and I did my due diligence to learn about what a village was. I think Boston may have been one of the very first as our model, and it seemed to make sense. And so I worked to get some initial funding to be sure everyone could afford to join and provided support. But the degree to which it really made sense and it's taken off across our city is it's reassuring, it's thoughtful, and it's a great way to build a supportive community together when we need it. So I'm really thrilled to be invited. I believe in the village movement. Also, to shout out to my friend Mary Lopato, who has been a very good friend and great Washingtonian in doing the things that she's done. My wife met Mary first at a local DC law firm, and we've become friends. And I appreciate Mary's thoughtfulness, and I'm not surprised to find her involved with the village because Mary really is someone who contributes leadership to the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you for helping villages in DC get started. You'll be happy to know that the council members today are very supportive of villages and treat us well at this stage. So we're happy about that.
That's good to hear. So let me start with saying that our city has made a lot of progress. As many of you know, we were named a few years ago the first LEED Platinum city in the world. We have done things like added more green roofs per city, just in sheer numbers, each year over the past 5 years than any city in the nation. We've done a lot to restore the Anacostia River. I'm also chair of DC Water. We've done a lot to really help clean up our waterways, and we've been a leader on energy, environment, restoration, and our city I could not be more proud of the things that we've accomplished and have become a model for other cities around the country, and we're helping to teach and share best practices with what we've done in DC. So we're going to talk about climate change, and I will do my best to really make it relevant to what's going to happen in DC and what will happen in Georgetown in particular, and also what your city is doing in trying to both mitigate climate change as a citizen of, the world, but also what are we doing to try to protect the city from a changed climate. Now, we've all seen, this has been an extraordinary year where everything that's been predicted starts coming true with droughts, famine, diasporas based on climate, and then, of course, wildfires that have been raging, not just in the Northwest, California, but also in Canada, impacting our Midwestern states. And then we've had floods, that we've had record amounts of rain. And this is a changed climate. If you, look at the growing bands of what areas are appropriate for plantings, you'll see that the bands are shifting north, that the climate has changed. We in DC will probably, the best model in the next 20 to 30 years would be Nashville, will be our climate. And we have to adjust. And we, again, have to do our best to try to slow down the temperature rise. And I did attend on behalf of DC, but certainly not in the UN delegation, but I went to COP21 in Paris, where the agreement was made to keep the overall temperature down from not rising beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius since the beginning of the industrial period. And even with that, we know that there'll never be an average normal climate in our lifetimes, and probably not for, even if we do everything, for 100 years. 1.5 degrees average it's a lot, and it's made a big impact. And I don't know whether we will meet that or not. But there's a lot of folks out there, including our city, that is trying. And so with that topic about DC, let's and climate change, Lynn, let's start the slides. So of course, climate change in DC. Next slide. So the main things that will be impacted is what some people call being wilder, wetter, and warmer. We are, we've seen the storm surges, we've seen extreme weather. Who knew what a derecho was until about 15 years ago? Sea level rise, and heat. And what all that does is it mixes together. When you think about heat, heat is energy. And so if heat with energy evaporates water, and then there's storms, and we have a crazy amount of rain. Next slide. So heat waves, as many of you know, they're dangerous. That Chicago had a heat wave about 20 years ago that killed many people. They didn't have air conditioning. Some didn't even have air fans or window fans. That's certainly changing, but heat waves are dangerous. And we will have more and more emergency periods of heat. And our most vulnerable residents, not just seniors, but low-income residents who are not mobile. It's not easy for them to just get a hotel room somewhere or otherwise. They're vulnerable in these extreme heat waves. And the problem is that they will last a long time. Currently, we have heat emergencies, but they're over and then within 2 or 3 days. These heat emergencies will get longer and longer. Now, what are we doing? I mentioned green roofs. We're installing green roofs. We pay a subsidy to any building that puts on a green roof. We require stormwater management that includes, for new buildings, adding a green roof. We're also trying to get folks to paint their roofs white to reflect the sun's rays rather than absorbing heat. We have heat maps for the city now to see where the hottest areas are. We're on target to plant about 8,000 trees a year is our goal, but we've been exceeding that under Mayor Bowser, planting 10 to 11,000 trees per year. We partner with Casey Trees, we partner with the Park Service, but trees are the best thing you can do around mitigating climate change and also managing stormwater. We used to be known as the city of trees. And then what happened? Well, we had Dutch elm disease that wiped out the most beautiful stately trees across the city. Now we have other problems with other trees. The emerald ash borer, we're taking out the ash trees. The climate has changed what trees thrive where. We're continually trying to plant trees that are resilient. We have the Zelkova trees. We have kind of a Chinese oak, but you'll see them up and down around the city, but we're making progress. Our goal is to have the city covered by 40% of our city covered by trees. That will help make it cooler. You'll notice when you walk in a tree-lined area like we have in Georgetown, it just feels cooler when you walk in that area, whether it be around, I don't know, Dumbarton Oaks or where we have trees, it feels cooler and it makes a difference across the city. Next slide. We have severe storms, like I mentioned, the derecho. And what's different is that these storms are more intense, they happen quickly, and they happen internal to the city. We're used to looking at the weather channel or the weather map, and with the weather person telling us, we see this storm front coming our way, or we expect, this is Thursday, we expect on Saturday to have showers, but we also get unexpected storms that are not predicted. They're intense. I can remember when there's severe rain in, say, Tacoma Park, and it's sunny and dry around the wharf. We've all seen that more and more. These intense storms are getting more intense. Then the other part is our rivers are tidal, and that means the ocean impacts DC. So when we have hurricanes that come our way and push up the waterways, we also get the winds, we get the rain. We are subject to the aftermath of a hurricane, as we've seen from Hurricane Irene and other hurricanes that have impacted DC. Next slide. So heavy rain events. When the National Park Service, National Weather Service puts out an alert that beeps on your phone, that's because there's a risk to life or limb. We had our first National Weather Service alert a couple of years ago when it was flooding on Canal Road. You remember those pictures of people standing on top of their cars as the city flooded. That was an internal flood. It did not come from the Potomac River. It was an internal flood from all the rain that was dropped in the city. On September 10th, we had the same sort of thing up in Northwest DC, in wards 4 and 5. We had an intense rain that flooded homes, and we're still trying to help remediate the water damage that occurred. And so the flooding has gotten more intense, and it's internal to the city. And we're used to being on obviously 2 rivers and then Rock Creek. And we're used to the Potomac, okay, bad storm coming up, Chesapeake rises from a hurricane, Potomac could flood, or the Potomac could flood from the mountains, from Shenandoahs and such, come down. I remember seeing a picture where Chain Bridge was knocked off of its moorings from a flood from, spring and all that. So the rivers have flooded over the years, but now it's internal. And the solutions include the rain gardens, green roofs, trees, but also, as you know, DC Water, in order to prevent stormwater sewer runoff going into the rivers, where we have a combined sewer system, we're creating these tunnels underneath the city. We'll end up with at least 17 miles of tunnel, the size of subway tunnels, to work as rain barrels to hold water until it can be treated so it doesn't overflow into the rivers. The first section of 7 miles has been done for the Anacostia River, and it's prevented more than 80% of all the overflows. But it also is there to help prevent flooding for microbursts. We opened up a tunnel recently over by Brooklyn and over by the McMillan water treatment area. And that we had a terrible flooding problem over there that's already been abated by underground tunnels that now connect with the DC water tunnels. So the strategy has to be internal, and it has to be everywhere in the city to absorb water, hold water, and also to to dissipate water through greenery. Next slide. So the tidal part. So our sea levels are rising. They're dramatically rising. Our scientists have been conservative in telling us how much they're going to rise. The weird thing is that DC is on a tectonic plate that works like a seesaw. We're also sinking. So while the sea level rises and we're sinking, over time, we'll have a disproportionate impact. And what that means, of course, for DC is that you just look at Haynes Point. They did not intentionally build sidewalks that would be underwater during high tides. We've already seen our sea level rise by 11 inches, nearly a foot, over the past century, and they're continuing to rise and accelerate. So the sea level rise, which is, tidal, doesn't require a storm. It just means that more and more of the city will be impacted by flooding. So what we do are the things that we've talked about, not only restore wetlands, we're also looking at creating something called the living shoreline in our waterways. We're looking at ways to, well, I'll just say, DOEE, Department of Energy and Environment, is now telling folks you should build any new development should be built to the 500-year floodplain, not the 100-year floodplain, because these numbers don't mean anything anymore. In Buzzard Point, that is a flood zone. And so we're requiring buildings to prepare for the 500-year flood as they build there. Next slide. So we have Climate Ready DC. That's a plan that we did a few years back. We involved experts, including Catherine Hayhoe from Texas. You may see her on PBS and other areas talking about climate change. We brought in the best people in the country to help us figure out how is DC going to be impacted by climate change. We put overall strategies. We have 77 actions that need to be done, but now we're getting more fine grained. We're really moving to the next level on getting out a contract to do flood mapping internally for the city. Next slide. So when you do flood mapping, then we look at what's vulnerable, not just flood mapping, but heat mapping too. We saw in New York City where the subway system was flooded and the subways, some of the trains stopped underground. You've already seen driving through the city at times where there's sandbags around the air vents and medians where we get air for our subway system, for the metro. We have to begin to start developing, and we are, ways that we're going to protect DC water treatment plant from the Potomac. We have to protect our subway system. We have to protect our substations for electricity, and anything else related to the infrastructure of the city has to be protected, especially from flooding. But extreme heat, we built our rail system to a certain level of specs, but now when it's really hot for a long time, we have to slow Metro down because the rails warp and the trains will derail. The heat of the grade of steel that's used, it bends, it warps. We have to design our buildings to be more resilient. It makes me nervous when I see these high rises built in the city that are all glass windows, because we know those buildings will heat up if their power goes out like a car within about 5 to 6 hours to where it's uninhabitable. The windowed buildings they make me nervous. We have to identify our neighborhoods that, especially where residents are not very mobile. And I'll be honest, we built affordable housing in floodplains. Cities did that. Cities built around industrial zones, so we have poor health outcomes for low-income residents, but they also built around floodplains. And DC is no different. We have a number of studies and plans going on now to protect those neighborhoods to help. Government and implementation. We're the first city in the country to put standards on existing buildings to reduce their energy usage. It's not just building codes for new buildings, they're energy standards that you have to get to every 5 years, or we will fine the building owner substantial fines. You can't just pass this on to your tenants. It will begin to impact the equity of your building. We are serious. And it includes multifamily buildings. It includes affordable housing buildings. Took a lot of guts for the mayor to include them. New York City passed the same law right after us, but excluded affordable housing buildings. There's another city, I think is Seattle, that is doing something similar, but exclude all churches, exclude nonprofits, or that may be Louisville. So the city excluded no one, but we're putting substantial funds in to help the buildings get the funds they need to retrofit to meet higher energy standards, because it's a quality of life too. A building that works efficiently with heating and cooling, it's a nicer place to live. We think as a matter of equity, they should not be excluded, but we have to help them fund it. Next slide. So we do have resilient design guidelines for how to deal with flooding, heat, power outages. We've engaged our stakeholders in floodplain regulations. We've got a wetland conservation map because we're going to preserve wetlands in the district because it helps the ecosystem. And the 8,552 trees does not include our partners, including National Park Service. That's how we're getting to over 11,000 per year. Next slide. So I think that I've already seen that slide. So there we go. So the heat island problems, you see where the heat islands are in the district. And, you know, one thing I'm thinking about a lot as your director of Department of Energy and Environment, we're receiving about 80 million a year from the ARPA, the American Recovery funds. DOEE is receiving the funds that we're putting into solar energy. We're putting it into managing green infrastructure. We're hiring people to train them and help create businesses from all across the city to deploy this work. But we know there's an infrastructure bill that's probably going to be passed, and there's a new budget. And I'm working on strategies of how do we, besides trees, how can we aggressively go after the heat islands? And cooling the city down is one of the highest priorities, but just think how kind of tangential that is, you know, just saying, okay, we're going to cool the city down. You know, if we can cool the city down, then there's less air conditioning that needs to be used. It saves, you know, building owners and homeowners money. It creates a higher quality living standard. But how you cool a city It's all those things that I talked about. But if we get a large major investment, we are going to use the heat mapping, and we're going to go after those red zones very aggressively. Next. So the other thing we do is a resilience hub. We're deploying about anywhere from 10 to $20 million worth of solar that we help support each year. And we're adding things to the solar deployment. At the brand new library in Southwest over by the wharf, we gave them about $1 million and said, this library designed from the beginning, let's make it a resiliency hub for the public housing that's all around it. So people can keep their medicines cool and get their phones charged, the things that they need in the event that the power goes out for a long period of time. So we're using solar to create resiliency hubs, along with planning with, certainly with neighborhood groups saying, where do you think we should put a resiliency hub? And what should it look like and what needs to be in it? And so the resiliency hub deployment starts with the most vulnerable communities, and then we move it across the city. But it also in Shaw, we have or Columbia Heights, there's an affordable housing building that was done by Jubilee Ministries. And when they deployed solar, we partnered with Pepco, who put a large battery storage that works for their community room, so that the people in the building, should their power go out, have a room that can keep them cool in the community room, but also protect their medicines and get their phones charged, that sort of thing. So the resiliency hub is either site-based or it's neighborhood-based. And so, as many of you, or some of you may know, right now when you have the power go out during the summer on a very hot day and evening, we send Metro buses over and have people sit in the buses to cool. We need to really bring this more into the infrastructure in neighborhoods, and not, I don't want to say that Metro buses are a bad thing to do, but we need to build greater infrastructure and resiliency in our cities. And that's what we're working on. So I hope I didn't lose Lynn. Lynn, next slide. So with that, I want to say that DC, I believe, is on, with the mayor's support and leadership, I think we're on the cutting edge, but we have so much more to do. And the strategies that we're using are generally all of the above. I will say that the council has been very supportive of funding our programs. We're a well-funded agency. We've got a lot of capacity, and being a city state, it's easier to deploy and implement faster than it is for other cities like us. And, we've got more work to do to see that our city's resilient, and really to provide leadership on reducing our energy use. And we're going to do it. I'll say a couple of things and then take questions. One is, we've had one of the largest growth periods since 2006 in the history of the city, unmatched except for maybe right after World War II. And you've seen the commercial buildings go up. At the same time, we've decreased our energy usage by about 5% in the commercial buildings overall. So overall, the city's use of power, at least in all these buildings, is going down. The use of water is going down. We have deployed a lot of green infrastructure, and we're starting to see some of the benefits of that. So there's a lot more to be done, but I'm proud of our city, because our developers, our building owners, our residents, our citizens that vote, you expect this. You expect your city to be doing this work with no excuses. And that allows me to do things that are harder in other cities, and I appreciate it. So thank you, Lynn. I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Tommy, and thank you for all you're doing to help the city get to where it needs to go. I really, I know you're making a difference, and I hope you know that as well. So we're now opening up for questions, and I'm sure that there are a number of them. I have a question online in the chat box asking if the community resilience hubs are going to be fully staffed, and how will people who know who live in the areas know that they exist?
So in DC, we have a whole kind of under the mayor program where every ward has two mayor's office of community relations. They're community organizers in each ward. They have the ability to bring in Serve DC and other staff through our neighborhood services. We are able to deploy a lot of people very quickly. And, just have to say through the pandemic, we had to fully staff our testing tents, our get food out to seniors and others. The mayor deployed a lot of people in a short period of time. And then, I think we had trouble for the primaries, but then we fully staffed, for the most part, the general election. And that was during, when the city was essentially under lockdown. And we did that with city employees responding, and had a very good coordinated event for the city election. So I feel like we have core staff, but then we also have the ability to mobilize your the city employees that work for you.
Gotcha. Okay, so now we're opening it up to other questions. Does anybody have a question or comment?
I do. Sarah?
I'm sorry, Sarah?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Hang on.
We got you. You're here.
Okay. My question is, where can we go online to find out about, for instance, what the buildings, for instance, an apartment building, what is expected of them, and where can we go online to find out where those hot spots are? I mean, I find your talk was fascinating, and I thank you very much for it. But
It's a great question. Trying to think if we display by building, and I think we do.
Well, you said the difference between the office buildings and, say, I live in an apartment building.
Yes. I'm trying to think. Sometimes some information, I think this is all public, and we keep it on our website. We've been getting the building energy scores for 8 years now. And for the past 6 years, buildings are fined if they don't provide them. So we have the building energy scores for most of the buildings across the city. And at doee.dc.gov, under energy, but also BEPS, which is Building Energy Performance Standards. And I realized we have a lot of information, a lot of scorecards, a lot of information online. So I don't know how hard, I can navigate it, but I don't know how hard it is for others. So if you go to our website and then navigate, but if you run into a stumbling block, just email me, tommy.wells@dc.gov. So that's tommy.wells@dc.gov if you run into a stumbling block. But we keep almost all of this online under our website.
What is the website again? DOPE?
doee.dc.gov.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Hans, I believe you have at least one question. I'm assuming there'll be more.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Tommy, for a very exciting, very informative talk. I really enjoyed it. I learned a few new things, even though I specialize in climate issues. My question is, what is the district's policy, if there is one, to reduce gasoline-powered transportation systems? I'm thinking of buses, commercial vehicles, personal cars. What is the picture?
Hans, that's an extremely important, great question. And I mean, I'll just give you a little bit of the picture why it's such a good question. DC doesn't, when you think about the vehicle miles traveled, and you look at what levers we have, we don't have, I mean, I'll get to where we do have levers, but for the most part, we don't have a lot of levers on folks that drive into the district, commuting and leave. I mean, there's things that we can do to discourage commuting. So with that, you'll see that about 24% of the greenhouse gases are caused by vehicles in DC. 74% are our buildings. I can get at the buildings. Now, how do we do a strategy on the vehicles? So this is what I've got for you so far. We've got pretty good control over the circulator bus. So we're aggressively electrifying the circulator buses. And with the Volkswagen settlement money that came in because, you know, they were cheating on emissions, we got about 8 million. We're putting most of that towards both helping the Delta when they get a new bus. If it costs more to get electric, we pay the Delta out of that. Also, we're using the switchers. The switchers are train engines at Union Station that move trains around. They are always your oldest. They're like over 50 years old. They account for anywhere between 1% to 3% of the NOx fumes in the city. They're horrible. I see them out my window. They're fun if you wanted to collect them because they're so old. You know, they still have them where there's only one, you know, the conductor can only drive from one end. But we're giving money out of the settlement money for them. They're not ready to electrify. So we're paying the Delta to have the cleanest, most efficient, to go the extra to get the cleanest switchers they can get and switch them out now. Eventually, we're going to help them electrify. Then you get to the other things like Metro. I know the council, I've been meeting, or I've talked with Phil Mendelson. We're trying to leverage getting Metro to electrify their buses. I realize it's a big lift. And frankly, in my opinion, the bus system has always been secondary to Metro. They invest like they should, you know, in a better subway system, but the bus system generally is left behind. I think that we're going to have to be far more aggressive with them on the bus system. On cars, while we're working on electrifying, you know, we're working on an EV roadmap so that, you know, you can get your car charged while you're in the city. We also have to think through, we don't want to keep the level of congestion in the city. So we're looking at deploying infrastructure and how that's going to happen. It's already being deployed. A lot of the market's taking care of it in some ways. The question in some ways, Hans, is should Pepco be able to rate base electrification charging stations across the city? Pepco can move faster, but should they then control the market? I'm trying to figure that out because we want to hurry. Pepco can hurry, but do they want to both rate base the infrastructure and then make money? We're not going to let it stop us, but these are some policy questions out there. And then what are the other things we can do to incentivize, whether it be, now this is a, you know, as you know, we have to be really careful how we talk about this, but congestion pricing, because there has to be an equity overlay. If we congestion price our arterial, you know, areas, the arteries, often lower income residents are the ones that are not served by Metro and they need to get to their jobs. Figuring out how we don't disadvantage low income residents and low income wage earners, it's complex, but doable. Last thing is, I'm proud to say that there's something called TCI, Transportation Climate Initiative. That's where a bunch of states have gotten together. We've been meeting, talking about, let's put a surcharge on fuel suppliers and then take those funds and redeploy it into reducing internal combustion engines, or the use of gasoline burning fuel vehicles in the city. And so we've been part of that meeting, but then it came down to who's going to sign on, because it'll raise the price of gas. And so DC and Massachusetts signed on, and the other folks are really trying to work through their legislatures. But DC is the inaugural signer to say, we'll do it. And that can do things like enhance, the Long Bridge, enhance the train station for the Virginia trains that come up over at, at Lafayette Square and or other areas. And so it's a comprehensive strategy, but it's a great question, Hans. I'm open to ideas.
All right. Well, more power to you to begin with.
And I'm willing to bet Hans has some great ideas he can share with you. Are there any other questions? Yes, Mary.
Hi, Tommy. Thank you. This is eye-opening, and obviously you're really earning your money. You're doing a lot of work with this. Lynn mentioned at the outset your famous initiative as councilman to start the 5-cent plastic bag tax, which I understand there were a lot of grumblings. I was one of the grumblers, but now it's habit, and it really has had an impact on improving the Anacostia River, and it's being adopted by other states. So is there any comparable thing, any comparable initiative that we can do as individuals to help with climate change? I mean, other than planting trees or buying electric cars, what do you have anything in your bag of tricks for the individuals on a daily basis?
So I think that a new kind of way of looking at things is going to be around what was the carbon cost of a choice that we've made. That's going to be new because we've already had, everybody's pretty sensitive about, is this the right fish to buy at the fish store? Are we using the Monterey list? Or, there's a number of things that people are already doing their part in trying to figure out, what's the right choice. But I think around carbon cost of whether it be single-use plastics or our air source heat pumps, when you upgrade your air conditioning, getting off natural gas, trying to eliminate natural gas, actually, that those kinds of choices add up. And there's a real interesting national impact on plastics when the price of oil was going up for a while, whether it be trash cans, just things that you wouldn't even think about of issue around plastic. The degree to which we rethink not just how the plastics end up in our waterways, but the carbon intensity of that. And I think kind of reorienting ourselves, Mary, of like, what's the carbon cost? It's a real different way of thinking. And, I think about, it's a great question because I'm always trying to get better. I'm supposed to be a model for y'all, an example. And I often, will make a choice and say, you know what, that wasn't the right choice. But I think about vehicle miles traveled and getting me my food. I think about how the food was grown and such. There's, I think we're all learning, but all these choices add up, Mary. And it's a great question. and we're all learning.
Mindset. Thank you. I will endeavor to take that under advisement, but it is difficult.
None of this is easy, Mary, none of it.
I-
Are there any other questions for Tommy?
Lynn?
Yes?
Hi,
Carol?
Carol here. Tommy Carol Kelly. I live in Hillendale and serve on the board of Georgetown Village. On behalf of both organizations, let me add my thanks to those who have already thanked you for everything that you're doing. It's critically important to our present and future. My question is this. I know, for example, in the greater DC area, there's a formal metro board, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and you know, their structure is to coordinate environmental issues kind of in the greater metropolitan area. Is there anything like that on climate change in our greater city area? And I know there's kind of no boundaries to it. You keep going from the cities to the states to the world, but you know, are we talking to, is there any coordination with Northern Virginia and Maryland and the greater area that we live in?
It's a great question, because we're so interdependent, even though we're separate governments. The forums that I use, one is Council of Governments, COG. That's one place where we work together on the Transportation Planning Board, some things like that. There's a Chesapeake Bay Commission where about 8 or 9 jurisdictions plan together on how we're restoring the bay, and we all have our part in that, and we come together and share leadership. Right now, Virginia is the leader of that. I'm on something called the Ozone Transport Corridor, which is the states that contribute to ozone that impacts all of us, and talking about how people's coal-fired plants are operating. What are we doing about vehicles? So we're in those things together. The question that you asked, though, is what about climate mitigation and climate change? The Transportation Climate Initiative, focusing on vehicles, was facilitated by the Georgetown Climate Center at Georgetown University. And that's been a forum for us to just talk about coming up with this plan about, you know, of putting a surcharge on gasoline from the supplier and redeploy it together. So there are forums. I will also say that DC is a member of C40, which initially was the largest 40 cities in the world that were organizing together, and somehow DC got in, but now it's up to 90 to 100 cities. And we operate regionally as well with that, with North America and such. So there's different forums. Sometimes we're put together by EPA. You can't, I'll just say, you know, politically, you cannot underestimate the role of the federal government to create those forums. Under the previous administration, I remember going to a Mid-Atlantic region conference on creating electric corridors for, you know, for charging stations and such from here to Boston. And major car companies were there. All the major utilities were there. The state representatives were there from transportation and such. I was there. And we're planning together of how we can create electrification corridors for cars and trucks and such. There was nobody there from the federal government. I mean, we had congressmen there, nobody from the federal government. So under the new administration, when you think about intermodal transportation between cities and interstate commerce, you have to have the federal government. And so the federal government has come back. But that's where the coordination really is going to come from.
Thank you. Very thoughtful. Thank you.
Thank you. That certainly makes sense. Tony, I see you have a hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
I do. I was wondering, I know there's been some controversy and I don't know the details about the MacMillan Park, which is a very large piece of land and is subject to being developed into condominiums or houses or whatever, which clearly will reduce a lot of trees and other green things. Can you tell us a little bit about that and if there's anything we should be doing about it?
Well, MacMillan used to be our water treatment plant for the city. It has extraordinarily large caverns where water was held throughout, and there's probably about 13 caverns. The concrete tops, which are covered with ground, do not have trees on them. Because the concrete tops, there's not, I don't think there's even rebar in there, that you cannot drive a truck over the top of the MacMillan reservoirs because they'll fall through.
Uh-huh.
And it's a large tract of land in the city. I will say that Olmsted's son created a walking path around the perimeter of MacMillan that we should try to recreate and protect. He wasn't as good as his dad, but at least they were trying. And it's part of the history of the city. We should probably preserve one or two of those water caverns, but the rest is not programmable land. It does not have any natural wildlife that is of sensitivity to the city. It has very interesting remnants, historic pieces from the water plant that are planned, my understanding, will be preserved to show how it worked. But otherwise, it should be developed. And it should be developed thoughtfully. That it's not a contributing asset. It's not an activated park because it's dangerous in some ways. I think there's a way to thoughtfully preserve to show what its function was. But otherwise, I believe it should be developed. It should have a strong transit aspect to it. I think it's got to interact with the hospital center campuses that are there, whether it be housing for healthcare workers or senior housing, because we have an incredible healthcare network there. People in that neighborhood have to drive in order to go to the grocery store. We should put a grocery store and other things so people in that neighborhood can walk there. It's a transit solution to reduce vehicle miles traveled.
Good.
It's not a contributing asset, and you can't plant a tree on top of one of those domes. So I really started off on the side of the preserved MacMillan Park. Then I've crawled all over it with engineers and folks, and have come to the conclusion that it's not an urban contributing asset.
Oh, well, thank you, because I have no idea what the two sides of the argument. I've only heard one. I appreciate that. And now can I ask one very personal question? Does your staff include an arborist? I have an absolutely wonderful shade tree and I don't want to lose it.
The short answer is yes.
Uh-huh.
The long answer is the urban tree group is with DDOT because they have all the cool equipment to go up into trees and cut stuff out. But we have an arborist that works with them for the city's tree strategy. Our arborist is user friendly, and you don't have to go to DDOT to get help. You can come to us too. And Jim, I think it's Woodard, which is an appropriate name for an arborist.
Okay, thank you. I'll look for that. And I think your talk is fabulous. I had no idea we were doing this much or thinking this much about the big issue.
Well,
Thank you.
that's the goal of Georgetown Village, to show you what
Right.
everyone's thinking. So Tommy, I thank you on behalf of the village. I thank Mary for helping us set this up. I thank Carol and Emily, our program chairs, for arranging such fascinating programs for us. It really has been an interesting discussion, and I know that you've definitely brought us a lot to think about and let us know what the district is up to. So again, much thanks. I do hope those of you online will join us in October on the 27th, when Diana Greenwald is speaking on myth makers and the art of Winslow Homer and Frederick Remington. Our programs are always open to the community. This is a community service brought to you by Georgetown Village. And we welcome you to attend, to tell your friends, and to join us at this time when we can Zoom in and learn together and really kind of better ourselves, as well as learning about our community and how we can make a difference. So Tommy, thank you so much. This really was a fabulous discussion, and thank you to all of you for attending.
Well
Thanks,
done,
Lynn.
Tom. Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Have a nice evening, everyone.